Welcome to Dear 21-Year-Old Me, where we ask our guest what they'll say to their 21-year-old self and go back in time and discover how they celebrated their 21st birthday. He's your host, Jeremy Irvine.
Hello and welcome, and thanks so much for joining us. Today on the show we catch up with Darcy Milne. Well, who you ask is Darcy Milne? Well, he's the voice at the start and the end of this show, literally the voiceover and audio maestro of Dear 21-Year-Old Me. Now, Darcy has a fascinating story. Not only is he one of the best podcast and radio production professionals in Australia, he's also a deeply humble and reflective guy. Now, up front, a disclosure, I'm a client of Darcy's podcast production firm, and happily so, but I wanted to chat with Darcy because of three things. Firstly, like him, and as we'll hear, I'm a radio nerd, and unashamedly. Secondly, for someone who's not yet 30, Darcy is at the top of his game. And finally, in my interactions with Darcy as I kicked off the planning and now the implementation for this podcast, it struck me that he had some cracking reflections on life. And then when I was doing my research, as I found out, and as we will, how Darcy met his wife Emily, it is a story for the ages and one I wanted to share. This is a fantastic interview with a deeply humble, reflective and genuine guy who has worked at the top of radio in Australia. But before we meet Darcy, let's go back in time to the year 2015 to find out what was happening when he was turning 21. In Australia, we were listening to Adele, Ed Sheeran and Michael Bublé's Christmas. Overseas, Arsenal defeat Aston Villa in the FA Cup. England defeat Australia 3-2 in the Ashes, regaining the Ashes. And New Zealand beats Australia 34-17 in the 2015 Rugby World Cup final at Twickenham in London. The All Blacks beating Wallabies. Some things just don't change. In the US, the New England Patriots defeat the Seattle Seahawks. It's the most watched TV program in US history. Katy Perry, Lenny Kravitz and Missy Elliott lead the halftime show. Hawthorn wins its third consecutive grand final, beating the West Coast Eagles, while the North Queensland Cowboys win the 2015 NRL grand final, defeating the Brisbane Broncos 17-16 after a golden point. It's the Cowboys' first ever premiership after the club was founded in 1995. And Michelle Payne becomes the first female jockey to win the Melbourne Cup in the race's then 154-year history, riding Prince of Penzance. 2015's top-rating TV show in Australia was the AFL Grand Final. It's one of 13 programs in the top 20 Australian TV shows that year that were sports coverage. We're also watching MasterChef, My Kitchen Rules and Le Bloc. And we farewelled one of cricket's greats, the captain of the commentary team and indeed one of the great test captains, Richie Benaud, also one of the icons of the Australian 80s, Alan Bond, and the esteemed Colleen McCulloch passed away as well as former state premiers Joan Kerner from Victoria and John Bannon, former South Australian Premier. Rosie Batty is named Australian of the Year. Malcolm Turnbull replaces Tony Abbott as Prime Minister of Australia. While in Queensland, Campbell Newman and the Liberal Nationals are defeated in the state election that year by Anastasia Palaszczuk and the Australian Labor Party. Welcome, Darcy.
Thanks for having me. It's awesome to be on the show.
Well, thank you so much for coming along today. Hey, mate, you heard the introduction where we stepped back in time to 2015, which was the year that you turned 21. Was there anything that you remember about that year specifically?
I heard your introduction and I just remember Adele being everywhere. And so I was working in radio at the time. And my goodness, you could not escape that on the airwaves. It was, I don't know if that album had come out just then, but I definitely remember Adele. And then for me, I just remember radio was my world at the time. So I was working as an audio producer and 2015 was producing breakfast radio for me. And so I was just very much engrossed in that world.
Which we will come to. Let's have a chat about your 21st birthday celebration. What did you do? Where'd you go? How many people went? And we'll all keep it PG. PG rated,
Trust
says
me,
us.
It was very PG.
The politest guy on radio you are, Darcy. Sure. So let's step back in time. Insert Darcy's little sting that goes, whatever it's called, the sound effect that goes back in time. The irony of you actually being the voiceover and then the voiceover being interviewed is not lost on me. I'm sure it's not lost on you. But in all seriousness, let's have a chat about your 21st.
I'm so glad the question is what was your 21st birthday like and not what was your 16th or 14th, because every birthday in the lead up was boring as hell and I didn't have a large group of friends, so I'd always just go bowling with the family. But come the 21st, my sister...
Bowling's cool.
Bowling's cool. I don't want to be down on anyone who's still doing that. But come my 21st birthday, my sister, who I have 5 sisters growing up, only boy, and one of my older sisters had planned a full surprise birthday party. And I had the only inkling I had is that people from work were like, your sister's adding me on Facebook. That's weird. But then I didn't realize the result of that was she was coordinating all of the key people from work and life and growing up, old family friends, and had invited them to this party in the Piedmont Bay Hotel, I think. And so 30 to 40 people of my favorite people were there, and I walked into this unreal atmosphere. And it was cool. There were like formal parts where there were speeches from really special people. So like my grandma who's passed spoke, and my first radio mentor spoke, and my dad spoke. And then there was just a lot of fun. And I would say the odd alcoholic beverage was also consumed.
The odd alcoholic beverage. Hey, given you're a radio guy, podcast guy, did you do were you your own DJ that night?
I believe my sister at the time was dating a DJ.
Right.
Which was very handy because not only so for context, I was working as an audio producer in radio, so doing the production and recording and editing, but then also often on the weekend I would be DJing weddings or parties as well. I just loved the whole production side of that. So I got a night off that night.
You didn't have to duck out to
DJ my own wedding.
Right. You did DJ your own wedding. Your wedding, we're going to come to, because add a shout out to Emily before we even start talking about how you and Emily met. And another shout out to Dom Evans, whose podcast was brilliant on this on that matter. But let's keep talking about your 21st. So at the Piedmont Beach in Sydney, it's for those of us who aren't from Sydney,
it is right in the heart of. Yeah, it's kind of right near the water in Darling Harbour, and there's an indoor part of it and an outdoor part of it. It's also next to the casino, so it's quite a vibe happening out on the streets. There's a lot of energy. My sister invited a whole eclectic mix. So one of the mix that came was all of my church friends as well. So that probably put a limit on how crazy this night gets. To be fair, though, Jeremy, I'm very straighty 180. I'm very boring in that respect. So what it could have become, I don't think I was really missing out on anything.
But you went home and tucked in bed by 9 o'clock with a cup of tea.
Yeah. It wrapped up respectable.
Welcome to my date night. Sorry.
It was very respectable.
Very cool. Hey, that is awesome. But that's interesting because you're obviously working around it. You were then, so a real mix of people from your church and your kind of outside work friends, but then also your radio friends.
Yeah, and I didn't appreciate it at the time. I certainly enjoyed it and loved that she had done that.
Yeah,
but I think looking back, it's more and more special because when in life, other than a wedding or an event, do you have all of your nearest and dearest in that capacity?
So great night.
Great night.
And a night
we'll do
off
again.
DJing.
10 out of 10. DJ was all right. She broke up with him, so I can now say it was a bit of an average DJ.
Fair enough. Talking of DJs, I want to step back in time even further because this is the whole concept of Dear 21-Year-Old Me is we talk about, 21 kind of being the launch pad for someone, but when I did my research about you, that's not necessarily the case because you've been in the biz before you were turning 21. So I'd like to step back in time even further than you turning 21, back to the day you first walked into your community radio station, which from memory is on the Central Coast.
Yeah. So
walk us through that experience.
It's very vivid, and I'm someone who doesn't have a huge amount of vivid memories, but certainly that one was, because at the time I was growing up on the Central Coast. I had become interested in the radio world. So I first learnt live sound and then got wind that, hey, there's people in the radio space who do this. And I learned that because I'd grown up listening to the radio, and much to the dismay of my parents, I would be the person who would ring up and request a song, get the $50 voucher, and they'd have to drive me the hour to the radio station to collect it. And it was that first sparked the interest. And then from there, I applied for work experience and landed some work experience at CFM on the Central Coast, and walked in. Day one was sitting with the creative team who write the scripts and the ads. And then on day two, they walked me around to the production stable, they call it, from a guy called David Horspool was the production manager and still is. And I got to sit behind him. And honestly, within about 5 minutes of just watching him work, I was like, this is exactly what I want to do with my life. How do I get involved? What is this magic? What is this witchcraft that he's just taking voices and putting music, and then 10 minutes later you hear it on the radio? Like, what is this whole world? And so it was quite a surreal moment. And then I struck a great deal with my principal at the time, because I was still at school. I was like, I want to go and spend a day a week at the radio station. So if you're happy, do you mind if I take sport off on a Thursday afternoon? And I wasn't.
I always knew you were a good guy. Who needs cross country when you can go and do audio?
I mean, my tummy now wish I got more into PE, but from a skills and experience benefit, it was the deal of the century. It felt like a scam. And so for the next 2 years, I would sit behind David Horspool and watch him do his magic and help out where I could.
Wow. That is fantastic. A tangential question. Did you ever, or have you ever, or do you want to ever be I know you've been on air a lot, but do you have a wish to be the anchor or the name, so to speak?
I did during that school period. I had my own online radio show.
Go on. This is interesting.
Mum was great. Mum gave me a spare room in the whole house, which is ridiculous looking back now. But we put in a couch, we put in a couple of desks, and me and my mates on a Friday night would come together and record a little online radio show that would go out to mainly the school community. And so we'd have school bands on, and my sister worked at the movies, so she hooked us up with tickets we could give away. So there was always that love of playing radio.
Wow.
But certainly once I learnt the production and the behind the scenes, I think from a personality standpoint and from where I could see the longevity being, it was certainly the best option. And I haven't looked back.
You wrote in 2015, quote, "The humbling fact is that we're all replaceable, and what we do is a great privilege." So what did you mean when you wrote that, and what's your take on that now?
Well, radio gives you a great understanding.
Radio keeps you grounded.
Very much so. It didn't take too long to see that radio changes very quickly, in that if shows don't work, hosts are replaced pretty quickly. And that what was also happening at the same time is you go through school with the same group of people and the same experience. And then suddenly in the workforce, it's every year can be so different. And I saw that. So everyone is replaceable is a lesson I learnt very quickly. And so it's something I still carry, in that everyone's got their time. And I thought radio would be my world forever. And it turns out that, which we'll talk about later, but I've transitioned out of radio. And so I think keeping that in the back of your mind just keeps you focused in your day-to-day role.
And we will talk more, and we'll put the links to your bio. When you're in that pressure cooker environment, be it breakfast or, for you being the audio guy for one of the best known syndicated national radio shows in the country, Do you worry about the ratings, or is that the stuff that management come in and say, hey, how much does that play on your mind on a day-to-day level?
Ratings is a big part of, it's one of the markers of success, but certainly the marker of success that has the greatest impact. And so radio ratings is where they will survey a small portion of the population and ask them what radio station they're listening to. And it's still, I believe, books where you get a book sent to your house and you fill it out. Now, what that dictates is how popular a radio show is, and in turn, how much advertising can be sold on that show and for what price. And as much as it's not the only marker of success, it's the one you would have to focus on and you would feel the pressure of, because you know that would dictate really key decisions. It would dictate if the radio show you're working on would continue on next year. And before landing at Nova's National Drive show, I was producing Today FM Breakfast, where Carl and Jackie O had just left and gone to KISS in Sydney, and there was a need for a new show. And so I had come in and saw very quickly in the space of a year that if ratings don't meet where they need to be, suddenly the team and the beautiful people that you're working with are switched out and a new radio show is brought in. So it definitely has its importance. It's not the only thing, but you do feel the pressure of it.
Okay. In that environment, how do you become creative? How do you take a piece of audio, and there's one that I want to talk to you about in a minute. I know we've had a chat about it before, and it is just an absolute hoot. But how do you take a piece of audio? How do you take and make an idea out of it and make it funny? Yeah.
So the role where I had the most opportunity to do that was on the show called Kate, Tim and Marty. So it's Nova's National Drive show, syndicated to about 50 stations nationwide, across Australia. And the great thing about that is Tim, who is the anchor of that show and also the host, really sees the role of audio as another element in the theatre of what radio should be. And it should be funny, and it should be a distraction, and people are tuning on. People have their real jobs, which they're getting paid for, and driving home, and they should be able to just relax in that moment. And so the goal was always to make my role as an audio producer serve up content that can do that in a really great way. So one of the ways we do that is Kate Ritchie, who worked on the show, would say funny little things or make funny little sounds as she would go. I would be there frantically recording the show live, capture a moment where she says something funny, like makes a cockatoo sound, and then serve that back up to the host. And behind the scenes, there's a whole panel of buttons and sound effects. And the way it would work is there's an intercom system, so I can buzz Tim in the moment and go, hey, Tim, I've just captured what Kate was saying and it's up on your button bar now. And then he would fire it off and there'll be an on-air reaction there. And it was one of the greatest joys, because not every audio producer gets to play that role. Radio formats are really different. And so I feel really privileged that for the good part of 5 years, I got to have that almost on-air persona as Darcy on the pots and pans, Darcy in the studio as
because you mentioned that in the Dom Evans podcast, didn't you? That you didn't. Sometimes you wanted to make sure you didn't feel, and I'm passing your words, but paraphrasing words, that you were out the back putting the bits together. You had a much more creative, almost interactive role with the on-air team.
And
that's not usual, is it?
It's not usual. It takes time to build up that respect and that rapport. Right. It's got to start there. And then creativity too, you've got to learn the process of creativity. I always thought people are born with creativity. And so I idolize these people who appear to have it. Yeah. And I learned that I don't know that that's exactly true. I think creativity is a process, a series of knowing the process of where to start. Yeah. And so when it would come to forming a sound idea or writing a funny script for them, or you just start. I learned you just start. And it's like turning out the tap and the water's got to come out and it's going to flush out some stuff, but then an idea will come and you snowball and you work on that. And so to be given the respect to do that and them trusting me to pitch ideas, not always funny ideas. Some ideas didn't make it. But I took it upon myself to define what I wanted that role to be. And at that time too, just for context, I already felt like I had won the jackpot. My goal and mission in life was to produce Today FM Breakfast. Growing up listening to them, that was my goal. And so to have done that and then transition to a number one drive show, I was like, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to try.
How old were you doing today?
The way it worked, I was 15 when I started doing work experience at CFM on Central Coast.
Yep.
During my HSE, which is your year 12 exams, I applied for a job to be a junior audio producer, which I got, much to my parents' dismay, because I really just gave up on the rest of the exams because I was like, great, I've got a job. I'm in.
Got a job.
And so I moved to Today.
Awesome.
I moved to Today FM when I was 17 and spent 6 years with that company before then making the transition to Nova. So
you packed your bags at 17 and headed to the big smoke. So were you commuting from the Central Coast or you moved into Sydney for that gig?
No. Look, Jeremy, I like you, so I feel like this is a safe space. Embarrassingly,
yes.
I put my aviator glasses on because I thought I was the dude.
Well, you are the dude, Darcy. I mean, you've won a few awards now and then. But
I backed it up, but certainly at that point it was not established. And put my aviator glasses on, and my sister drove me, and I moved into this share house with 4 guys, and then I lived in the northern beaches and would get the little bus in, and it sounds glamorous. Look, that world, radio and live radio is amazing. One morning you've got Ed Sheeran walking in. The next, you've got a bucket of KFC rocking up because they want to sponsor the show. It's just this bizarre world, but context is the reality of it. The non-Instagram photos was working about 11, 12-hour days.
Yeah.
And certainly breakfast, you'd show up at 4 a.m., you'd finish at 4 p.m., and then you'd get up and you'd do that all again. So less glamorous, but I'm glad I put in the work, and I think experience, going back to your creativity question as well.
Yeah.
Just experience trying out stuff and knowing what works and then adding the stuff that works to your tool bag that you take with you is a big part of how you can then do that regularly on a high level.
And that goes to my next question. In the interview you did with Dom Evans on his podcast, you talked about over-delivering in respect and communication. So what have been some of the lessons for you navigating people, I assume, as an outsider looking in, who in commercial radio are under the pump with the ratings and there to deliver? So how's that all work? Because you're an integral part of the process, but you're not the one in the firing line. Yet, to me, it seems like this is an incredibly important cog in the wheel. And when you listen to some of the stuff that you've done with Kate, Tim, and Marty, and the cockatoo's tongue clip, I will put into the show notes from Dom Evans's podcast. It is classic. How have you worked your way around that? Because you're not an arrogant guy. I mean, I've got to know you a little bit, but you're not an arrogant guy. You're a very humble guy. But how do you kind of work your way through that environment?
Yeah, it is what you're speaking to there is the reason, like ego is a huge part of it if you're on air talent. And ego is a really healthy thing. Ego is not a dirty word at all. It's knowing who you are, what you can deliver, and having the confidence to do that. And when you're doing it at scale, that's important. That's important you have a healthy sense of it. Where it gets hard is when you don't have a healthy sense of it. And so I've worked at not Today FM or Nova, but I've worked at other stations where that ego was consuming for people. And I remember being in meetings where they were like, I hear your opinion, Darcy, but at the end of the day, it's my face on the billboard. And so you go, okay, cool. There's some big characters here. How do we navigate that?
Yeah.
The way you navigate that for me was adopting the headspace of I'm here to serve them. You're exactly right. audio producers tend to live on, whereas radio shows don't very quickly. And so I always had the mindset that I'm here to serve you guys in the best capacity I can. It's actually got nothing to do with what me or Das or my ego in all of that. I want to get the best result for you. And so what does that look like from a sound point of view? But then in terms of over-delivering with respect and communication, what I observed quickly is you can be a talented whatever. You can be a talented audio producer. You can be a talented executive producer. You can be talented radio staff. But if you don't have great communication and respect in those exchanges with the team around you, it actually doesn't work. And so it doesn't matter how talented you are, 50% of what you're adding is the respect and the communication. And so I think that's been a big part of what I've tried to develop and work on. And I love a good self-help book or a good podcast where you learn from others who are in a leadership space to communicate effectively, to respect people. The other thing too is the
when
thing
you
you
were
have
growing
to
up,
separate with radio. I was just going to say the other thing too, you're not doing open heart surgery, and I think you've got to keep that in the back of your mind. as much as the people around you will make you feel important.
Some of the talent might think that.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't you know who I am? No, I'm kidding. I'm sure it never happened in radio stations you worked on.
Never.
Who are some of the people you love to listen to? And I say in inverted commas, tongue in cheek, as a high school student growing up. Was it Today? Was it Triple M in Sydney? Was it, some of those marquee programs that really, Martin Malloy?
Locally growing up, it was CFM and Star FM on the Central Coast. I enjoyed both of the stations for different reasons. Star FM because they had Hog's Breath cafe vouchers they would give out. And so I collected many of the $50 vouchers thinking it's the greatest thing in the world. CFM obviously
much to your parents' chagrin.
I
know where the prize cupboard is, Mum. What are we doing for Christmas?
Yeah.
Exactly. I'm sure it didn't happen. I'm winding you up.
I grew up listening to shows like The Hit List with Tim Lee and Bigsy was one show I grew up. And so it was a surreal moment where Tim Lee now does graphic design for the podcast company that I run. That is a surreal moment.
The Tim Lee that's done the podcast graphic design for this podcast, no less.
Exactly, no less.
Big shout out to Tim Lee.
Big shout out to his work and his contribution. And then I listened to people like Jules Lund and Merrick Watts and Kate Ritchie was new to the scene and new to radio. And so as it progressed, I became a big fan of hers and Tim Blackwell.
Who you described as the best panel operator in Australia. Just
no
very
pressure.
Quickly, why? No pressure, Tim. Why is that?
A panel operator he's very much more than that. Quick caveat, he's definitely the host of that show and a driving force. But one of the roles he plays on that show is panel operation, which is controlling the soundboard, controlling sound effects, firing them off at a time that's appropriate, controlling the music. There's a lot to that. And typically it's an operational piece where you just have to make sure that works smoothly and make sure the ads play when they need to. But Tim uses that as a performance art, and the way he plays sound effects, the way he cuts off callers when they're not funny, which creates humor in itself, the way he develops a relationship with the audio producer where it's almost me and Tim as a team, a mini team, and then that feeds into the wider team. That was something I had seen glimpses of previously, but that was certainly a time and space of, wow, there's a really unique thing happening here. I'm not sure that anyone else can do it at the level you do it.
Some more quick-fire questions just on radio, because this is the inner radio geek in me coming out, and I know you and I could probably talk about radio for hours. Days. It's like Brendan would be 15 years younger, and a shout-out to Brendan. Because Brendan loves his radio too. What would you do if you owned your own radio station? What would it be called and what format would it be? And I know that I have thrown that at you about a week ago, so there's no pressure.
No pressure.
So magic wand, here you go.
It's such a good question. What I would
Thank
do...
you, Darcy. Darcy said that was a good question. There's my promo. Go on, sorry.
Look, and it leads into what I'm passionate about now, which is podcasting. And the reason I'm passionate about podcasting is because there's such a diversity of voices and topics and access you get. And so if I was going to create a radio station that was going to, we'll go national too. We're not going to go small. We're going to go to a national radio station.
Well, you've been national. You know, you've been on the number one national.
What we'll
you can keep name dropping the entire show.
I don't want to name drop, but it's fun. I think it's fun for others looking into.
I will for you.
Little space. What I would do is
so Darcy's got a national station.
Yep. I would have a programming that isn't what we hear on radio at the moment. So I think a breakfast show is important. It's informative, but I think it doesn't lend itself to interesting conversations that are thought-provoking. It really is sometimes the lowest common denominator, which is fine, and escapism is an important facet of it. And there's certainly, I would be ignorant to say there's not programs doing informative pieces. You know, absolutely is. But I just don't hear you wake up and you tune in and you hear the same voices talking about the same little jokes each time from a breakfast point of view. And I would just say, let's have some really, let's talk about headspace and mental health and support for working where you're about to go, which is work, you know, and you don't want to be thinking about work, but I don't know. I would have some change of programming for breakfast. I would use it as an opportunity to showcase new talent. Radio traditionally has had a really hard path of going, you've got to go work regionally, you've got to go to radio school and then go work regionally and then move to Perth, and then you'll get an opportunity at some point when someone who's been there for 20 years moves on. I think there's more opportunity to showcase new talent and try new shows. And I've seen in the podcast space, there's so many talented people. And the attitude is changing. People don't just want these large personalities. People want to connect with other interesting humans. And there's so many more than I think radio gives credit for. I think a drive show is important. Like the escapism on the back end of your day, I really see the value in it. I think that's why I spent so long producing that. And then I would continue on in the night. I would probably scrap the let's count down the 30 top hits. In a Spotify world, I think there's more opportunity to, again, use that for a platform for either showcasing new talent or having meaningful conversations that are going to make a difference.
Who's the best broadcaster on Australian radio and why? As we segue out of radio. I know that's a bit of a hard one.
It's a big question.
Because this is what you do. I mean, this is your thing. This is your industry. This is what you and I guess the corollary question to that is, do you listen to radio, particularly in Sydney, and go almost with a analytical mind and go, oh, that's what they did with that, you know, that piece of audio?
Sure.
Or we might ask that second question first and then come back to the broader one. Is it hard for you to kind of step back sometimes and go, I'm just going to listen, be it to a podcast or a show, one of your many podcasts that you produce. But how hard is it, in all honesty, just to step back and turn off the audio production brain?
It's pretty hard. It's pretty hard in terms of...
I love the honesty.
Yeah. It's pretty hard. But what it creates is my wife, who I met in radio, which we'll talk about. But my wife...
Oh, yes, we will.
She really understands the behind the scenes of radio as well. So the joyful moments are when we're in the car and listening and going, we would change that, or that's not right, or that was excellent. It's hard to turn it off, but it's become a source of joy, certainly in our relationship. In terms of then who is the best broadcaster, who's doing that, I would take the opportunity to sing the praises of Kate Ritchie. Kate Ritchie is which would surprise a lot of industry-specific people, I think.
Because she's not from radio.
She's not a quintessential from radio person.
Right.
However, that's where I think the real value comes from, in that she had a fantastic career as an actress growing up and being on Home and Away and being in the lounge room of millions of people, across the world. And then to then change her career and step into an industry that wasn't hers, but add so much to it. And I think she sells herself short in that. But from an outsider listening in, she's the life of that show, Kate, Tim and Joel at the moment, as is Tim in his own right. And we have a really great relationship, and I'm producing his podcast, and he's almost a default. I'm very much in admiration of him. But I think it's important to recognize that Kate Ritchie and her role, and doing it for such a long time, commanding an audience, bringing great content to that show, and just being a very funny person. And certainly when I worked with her, she gave me a lot of trust in that I could make fun of her at different times and can have fun with it. And I think that speaks to her as a person for allowing the team around her to do that. So Kate Ritchie, and then Kate Ritchie for the reason that we've already praised Tim Blackwell more than enough.
Yeah. Do you listen to other stations around you can listen to anything anywhere these days. Do you just go, right, this morning I'm going to listen to a station in Detroit, and I'm going to listen to a bit of CHR in Detroit or whatever. I don't know, anywhere. Is that part of your creative wiring, or is it like, no, I just, do you sample around, or how does it work for you?
I used to, yeah. I used to do it a lot. And real radio nerdy, I used to record other radio stations, and then you'd flick through and have a listen through what they're doing. What has happened, though, is there's been this shift in the medium. It's shifted into podcasting, where a lot of radio stations are now focusing their attention on podcasting. A lot of talented people from radio are making the switch. And I think in terms of what's happening with the world, there's a greater need for deeper connection and content to be consumed. And now audiences have choice, where radio, they didn't. It would just be really what's in your car, and you'd have the choice of 5 stations. Now you have the choice of 5 million podcasts to choose from. So I listen to podcasts a lot more than I do radio these days.
Okay. You said to Dom Evans in that podcast interview you did that, quote, radio's been a real home to me. So what made you decide to leave home, so to speak, and eventually start your own firm?
Really was home. Home for me, my real home growing up wasn't always a magical, wonderful place. And that's where radio from a very young age was that wonderful, magical place where you can be, there's adults doing their job around you. And so you can just enter that environment and enjoy being there and enjoy contributing to that. It also provided me with a lot of really wonderful male role models. Worked with amazing men and female in that space, but the need inside me was really kind of a dad figure at different times. And so I really got that. And so it was quite an emotional choice, being from 14 to about 26, spending all of your time and thinking you're going to be in radio that whole time, to then go, I see, we have arrived at the end of the journey. And so the end of the journey for me was, I had been producing Kate, Tim and Marty for 5 years.
Yeah.
I had the pleasure to win awards like Best Achievement in Production, where suddenly these people I grew up idolizing were in the same category from an awards perspective, let alone winning it was just a peak moment. And then I had seen the opportunity with podcasting. I had felt that need in myself of like, I want to lend my skills to content now that has a different conversation. And so I decided in 2016 to start Pro Podcast Production, where I would help anyone record, edit, sound and artwork design, get sound and artwork design rather, and then publish their content. And I wanted to create a place. What I saw lacking was there wasn't the same skill set in the podcast space. So people had wonderful stories to tell, but didn't know how to do that or have the expertise. And so I wanted to give my skills now to that medium. It was scary. I then built that up as a little side hustle. And then I made the decision almost 2 years ago now where I was like, it's got to be one or the other. And we had some real life shifts. I had some responsibilities that suddenly didn't revolve around me. And so it was a combination of that to go, now's the time to go and do this on my own. And as scary as it was, I'm so glad I did it. And it's probably one of the best decisions I've made in my life, other than marrying my wonderful wife.
Walk me through the last shift on Nova. You've talked about walking in. Let's book in this part of the conversation about walking out.
Oh.
Do you remember your last day at Nova?
I do. I remember the last week.
Right. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's actually funny, Jeremy. It sounds crazy, but I'm very much someone who just looks to the next thing. And so I actually haven't spent a lot of time thinking back. And so it's a little bit emotional. It's a little bit crazy to think back and have the last shift where they'd bought me some ciders because that's what I loved. And the team had brought me on air. And so I remember the last break, they just made a really nice tribute to Darcy on the pots and pans. Our sound man is off on an adventure and this is his last show. And it was wild. It was really, I guess because I hadn't anticipated it. It wasn't the shift in thinking between I'm going to be here for the rest of my life and I'm going to go and do my own thing came pretty quickly. And so, it was emotional. It was joyful, but it also felt like the right thing. And one takeaway from that was to not squash that quiet little voice inside you that's saying, hang on, I think we need to go in a new direction, or hang on, we need to make a change here. It's so easy in this day and age to squash that. And I'm so glad I listened to that little voice that said, this isn't the right thing to continue doing anymore.
Because you grew up in the studio.
Yeah. Like, boy, there's radio breaks where I was working with Dan and Maz, and it was just, I would come on and we would talk about the funny things I hadn't learned about the world yet. Like that I didn't realize Barbara Streisand was a real person. I thought it was just a song title. Or the time I dropped my keys down the elevator and got locked out of my house for 24 hours would then become a fun little radio story where Darcy was really a mess. He was just learning how to, navigate the world.
Yeah. Adulting. Craig Uchi grew up in front of us. You did kind of too in some ways.
Certainly to the people who I was working with, I grew up a lot. And you feel the responsibility of life and you realize a throwback to you, everyone's replaceable. You go, I'm replaceable and it's going to be okay. I'm not letting this show down. I'm actually giving way to other producers to step in and make their own mark on it. And I think that's an important thing. I think you've got to, it's hard to make that call, not just in radio, in any career sense of when is it time to hang up the boots and go on to your next mission.
I want you to tell a story, please, that starts with the phrase, yeah, no, I'm keen. Yeah, no, I'm keen.
Look,
Darcy,
famous.
Tell us about that.
Step in the time machine.
You're just going to insert the sting that goes back to...
Yeah.
I'll put that in the notes. Yeah, no, I'm keen. 4 words I took from that very, very good Dom Evans podcast.
It's wonderful.
This is a ripper story. The floor is yours.
At the time working for Dan and Maz. I was doing their breakfast show. Today FM Breakfast. And as part of that, for anyone who does listen to radio, wacky events and promotion is all part of the theatre of it. And so the on-air team had devised this idea that people can call in and nominate their hot barista. Where do you go to go and see someone attractive that's out of your way. With the grand plan, and this could only happen in radio. I'm not sure it's even appropriate now anymore, but the grand plan was to make a map of the top, get a bus full of single women on, and we're going to go and navigate that and say hello to all of these people. And it turned into a great event.
How very commercial FM radio.
Yeah. It was the Baywatch tour, and it was like nothing else I have experienced, because what ended up happening is it was all thrown together quite quickly. And so I think we were able to, rather than just getting the people who were nominated, we needed extra people. And so Emily, my now wife, had rung up for a segment, and we invited her into that because we just needed people. And what eventuated, Jeremy, was
I love this story. Go on.
Double-decker bus at 11 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, dear.
With the lights going and a slushy machine in operation. And we piled onto this bus. And my role as the audio producer was to capture the audio content and present it to on air the next day. And so we spent the day going around the bus. We saw Danny Clayton, who was a Channel V presenter. He had lined up on the street and was pouring water over himself on his Harley Davidson. And then we moved on to the Bondi lifeguards, who we all said hello to, and one of them took their shirt off. It was just ridiculous. But come lunchtime, where we're all sitting around and talking about how ridiculous this event is, I was sat across from my wife, Emily, and her best friend who had come with her at the time. Fast forward to the end of the day, I had got off the bus. Em gets off the bus, and this didn't age well, but there was a score sheet for every man we had seen that day. And rather than Emily rating all of the guys out of 10 that she had seen that day, she instead took the opportunity to write, would it be out of the question for Darcy to call me, and left her number. Now, Emily, listening to radio but not really understanding how radio works, didn't realize what content gold she had just developed, because she handed it to the producer. And rather than hand that to me, the producer in the next morning, live on air, a song was playing, and they said, "Darcy, we need you for this next segment." And so there was no prior knowledge to what was happening. And I walked in, and they're like, "A girl has left their number for you off this Baywatch tour." And I was stoked, because I'm just a geeky little audio guy. I'm like, what? And they're like, I'm like, who is it? And they're like, that's the catch. We're not going to tell you who it is. You're going to guess live on air. 30 seconds to live. So you're going to guess us live on air who it is. And I go, okay. And so where those words come from is we get to the guessing game. I get it down to 2 people. And
you do get it down to 2 people. Yes.
2 people.
Was it the? Hang on, I'm trying to remember.
I was like, was it the nutritionist who was Emily, my now best wife's friend, who had come on? And she was like, it's not. And Emily, the poor thing, is on the other side of the call. So she's just waiting for me to guess her name magically. And I said, you were pretty good too. Because we had sat across from lunch. The backstory is I thought I was trying to make conversation, and I didn't think Em was really giving me anything. And flip it, she thought the same.
Bad content. I'm changing stuff. So there wasn't an instant connection. I'm sure there is, because you got married, but you were just chatting at lunchtime.
We were just chatting at lunchtime. And I said, would you still like to go on a date with me? And Em says, yeah, I would be keen for that. And so rather than a typical date, fast forward to that weekend, there was promos running across, audio promos running across, not just Today FM, because we had a national show as well. So it was national promos. Tune in on Monday to find out how the date with Darcy and Emily goes.
It's like Perfect Match meets Today FM.
It's wild. And we had done that. We had set people up, and like I'd seen weddings and all sorts. And so it was kind of surreal. But what actually happened was where the real magic laid, in that Em and I went on a date. I booked a beautiful Italian restaurant. Jamie's Italian at Sydney. I made an effort, ironed my shirt. I thought that was making an effort.
That is making an effort.
Standard. And we have this date, and I realized, I reckon, within the hour, I was like, holy moly, we have just connected on every level. We've connected on a faith point of view and had a similar upbringing. We've connected on how we view and find the world. We've connected more on anything than humor, where we're just laughing and having the best night. It ends up to be a great date. I put Em on a train home, and I call my mum that night, and I'm like, this is actually, I've just met the person I'm going to marry. And I know that sounds crazy, but I just want you to remember that for the wedding, because this is an important moment. And fast track, it turned out that that woman would become my wife, and we've now been married for many years, and still are able to joke about the nutritionist. And
I wasn't going to go down that road, but are they still friends?
And they're not still friends, so
right,
okay,
look at that. And in that first date, did Emily go, oh, hang on, you're a bit of a keeper here, young Milne? Or did you have to kind of work your audio magic, so to speak?
I had to work some audio magic. To be fair, though, within a week, I had asked Em, I was like, Em, do you want to be my girlfriend? And she had said yes. So it didn't take too much audio magic, but she certainly didn't make the call that this is the man I'm going to marry that night, but certainly was very keen very quickly. And as a result, this relationship developed. And it's also, I think, worth mentioning, because I think it's important to talk about the bigger picture.
Yep.
Up until that point, I was just working 12-hour days, really focused on this career and building radio, and didn't have too much time for relationships or anything. So Emily entered the picture and changed my world in a number of ways. Not only did we have a wonderful relationship, it taught me there's actually more important things in the world, and it's those relationships we have, not just with our partners, but with other people. And that was a real catalyst for me to make the call to leave breakfast radio. And so I actually called up my boss and said, look, I've been with Em for about 6 months now. This job does not allow for the balance, and I think it's time to get that balance right. And he said to me, well, the only job we can offer you is Adelaide breakfast, which will be a little bit less hectic of a pace, but still breakfast hours and having to move. And so it was very fortunate and good timing that is also the same time that the Kate, Tim and Marty job popped up, and I applied for that and got that and was allowed to stay in Sydney, and as a result get married to Em, which was wonderful.
That's
pretty crazy.
I love that story. That is an awesome story. Awesome.
Crazy.
Did you play the audio at your wedding?
I did. Actually, I created an audio montage that played before Em walked down the aisle. Of course
you did. Right.
Because where
with
else?
Tim paneling.
Yeah, Tim's paneling in the background there.
And Kate Ritchie, shout out to Kate. That piece of audio. The cockatoo tongue. Anyway, legendary.
Fun.
So you play. You literally had an audio montage of. I just think that is absolutely.
I had
brilliant.
some key moments. I'm a bit reflective. Because I don't have a great memory, I go to a greater effort to document and write stuff as I go. And so after key milestones in our relationship, I'll record a little bit of audio, just capturing that moment. And so the wedding montage was actually a string of those moments from the very beginning to where the night I proposed, where I hit record on that from an audio perspective as well as pulling in cool people like Carl Stefanovic to voice part of the package. And Troye Sivan, Em's favorite musician at the time, voiced a little bit. So it was a pretty cool experience.
That's very now you started. That is a brilliant story. I absolutely love that story. So quick 5 questions about you. What's the go with not having butter or margarine with Vegemite?
Oh, is this a choice, like a personal choice?
No. You said this to Who was it? I think you said that maybe it was Dom. You said
in terms of not having margarine with
Vegemite. Let's go.
Oh, yeah, you're a madman if you do. 2 reasons why. I understand that a lot of people find that popular.
Western Starring, they're taking the sponsorship off this podcast. Well, they don't have sponsorship on this podcast.
Reason why, you can have a third piece of toast if you wanted to in the time it would take to butter 2 pieces of Vegemite butter. So it's an efficiency thing more than a taste thing as well. But I also don't understand the maybe I was putting too much butter on, but Vegemite is a beautiful thing on its own. Why wreck that experience for yourself?
And last, I will go and try it. Maybe. Do you only sing Shannon Knowles? What about me in karaoke? You going to start singing for us?
Well, there's a little boy waiting at the counter of the corner shop, and he's been waiting down there. My mum was a mad karaoke fan, and so she would always take us along to the little local RSL and make you perform, which in hindsight, I don't know, that's necessarily great for kids. But it's fine because my go-to was Shannon Knoll, What About Me? and
a Brie. This is showing my age, but I remember him doing it on Idol. So, anyway. Hang on, no. Did he come? No. Did he do that on Idol? I think he did. I'll have to go.
Go the fro. Guy Sebastian at the same time.
Guy Sebastian. Who went... You've hung out with cool people. Guys, my claim to fame is with Guy Sebastian is he went to the same primary school. About 20 years.
What a great claim to fame.
It's the only claim to fame I have with anyone anywhere.
What year was he in? Was he in a year?
Oh, I don't know, but he's 15 years younger than me. So anyway.
Excellent.
And a shout out to Ludale West Primary School, as it was then. Back in the day. Ludale. Anyway, right. You started your podcast just before COVID started, which was fascinating. But look, as you said to me, as we got to know each other and we've been having a bit of a chat, it hasn't been, for want of a better term, the Paddo perfect lifestyle for you, has it? There's been some challenges.
There's been some challenges.
Shall we have a bit of a chat? We're going to kind of dial down on the humour because this is really important because the guy that you are is framed by a lot of the people that come onto this are framed by a lot of experiences. You said, for example, when you had a chat to Catherine Mahoney, and again, I'll put the show notes, the links to that interview that you did with her, which was a fantastic. She's a classic, by the way. Absolute.
Love Cat.
She pops out of that podcast. But you're an instant parent. Not very old, Darcy.
No. Look, I'm 27 now. And so, last year, and it coordinated with the time that I left radio, I had a family situation where it wasn't appropriate for my little sister, who was 16 at the time, to be living at home anymore. And so Em and I had to make a really tough call there. Do we stand by and watch that unfold and watch that journey become a really difficult one for my little sister? Or do we step in and go, we don't know what we're doing, but we do have an opportunity and a spare bedroom at the house where we live for Maggie to come to Sydney and join us. And it was an absolute roller coaster ride for many reasons. And I think it's important to talk about because the world gets enough of the Instagram filter, right? People know people's highlights, but for all of us, we're going through something. There's always something that people are going through that people don't talk about enough. And so for me, it was a pretty crazy experience to go and become an instant, not a dad because I'm her brother, but become an instant guardian of a kid at that age. At the same time, losing contact with most of my family because of the circumstances that unfolded. And so it was a real trial by fire of how do we get this kid across the finish line, and became really responsible for her in terms of, okay, what school is the best school for her to get into? And no one prepares or trains you for that. And a 16-year-old is going through their own. No, they do not.
They don't come with a manual.
Where's the manual? And so I laugh about it. I can laugh and...
I thought you had it.
See, I thought you had it. See, we got our wires crossed.
I do. There's no Insta-filter here, let me tell you. I don't have them. No.
Humor is one of the great gifts God, I think, gave us to cope with things that are beyond comprehending or processing. And so I use that as a tool, certainly, but it was pretty rough. Life got pretty rough, and we're only really coming out the other side of that. And it teaches you a lot. It teaches you that, in life there's going to be some wonderful times where, be it personally, professionally, you sit in that moment and go, I can't believe this is happening. And then the other flip side of life is that it is messy and it's raw and there is no manual, and that experience of life and navigating that, I think, is just as important.
So in that context, how do you be a brother and what's the right word? Parent?
Yeah.
Guide? Mentor? You said dad, and that's but how do it's not a huge age difference to start with, and she's your sister.
Yeah.
And then what's the relationship, I assume it's a very positive one, with Emily and Maggie?
Yeah, Maggie's my little sister. Emily has been fantastic. I think it's different when it's your own family. There's a responsibility that goes with that. For Em's point of view, it wasn't her family. I mean, she married into that and it becomes extended family in a way, but she's been unreal in that journey, and it's been one that has taught us a masterclass on a whole range of different topics. The childhoods we have go a long way to shaping the people we are in our professional lives.
Oh yeah,
and I think it pulled back the window on that. And so Emily was great. Mags had a good approach to it. We found our middle ground. But we certainly couldn't have done that without other really talented people. And I just use the opportunity to say, if you're going through something that is really testing and you feel you're in the deep end, that there is no shame in putting your hand up and saying, I need help in this situation, and then seeking out the people who can do that. So for me, it was actually getting Mags into psychology and then talking to a psychologist myself of, hey, I have been going full steam on the radio journey.
Yep.
Almost as a way to cope with things growing up. And I think the reason I'm so good at what I do is because seeking the approval of those other people, those mentor people, the people in my perceived radio home was such a driving force. And so I recognize that wasn't necessarily the healthiest way to be coping. And so talking to a psychologist really changed my world during that, in that it gave me a perspective, it gave me some insight, and it gives you the tools to navigate what otherwise would be really difficult circumstances.
And there's a lot, and I don't want to go into the behind the scenes because it's none of my business or anyone's business, was a lot of what you were talking about in those I think you did a year of psychology. Was it a lot of that to do with reframing and giving you perspective?
Yeah.
For example?
When you first start psychology, you think you're just going to be chatting to someone and you tell them all your problems and then you walk out and nothing comes from it. But what actually happens is you learn about how your brain works, how you learn a whole range of tools that have been developed. And so for me, psychology, and I'm happy to be open about it, because if someone listening to this is feeling like they need some help or feeling like they're swamped, then psychology is a wonderful thing to explore. It was dealing with me. There was some real childhood trauma. Trauma is a powerful thing that doesn't get talked about enough. No. And so it was unpacking that. It was also learning that I really did have OCD and getting the clarification on, you have OCD and you've been living with OCD. Another reason I was so good at my job is because of that. So it wasn't all bad, but it was also understanding how you unpack and deal with that day to day. And so a huge transformation of that, going from OCD isn't just germs. So that was one part of it. And you deal with that, but it's also obsessive compulsive thinking. And intrusive thoughts is a big part of that. And so these thoughts that I just had thought for the longest time were just my own crazy voice were actually just the OCD cycle. You know, a thought would come in and you go, I've had this thought. Does that make me a bad person? And strange thoughts and like what we just put the label of crazy and you learn it's just a very common thing. You know, intrusive thoughts is a common thing. So how do you deal with that? How do you separate those thoughts and who you are as a person and learning you are not the sum total of your thoughts? And all of those wonderful exercises, I think, were really helpful in not just moving on and being effective, but I actually think the biggest business success has come from going through that process and understanding how I think.
And that allows you, therefore, to create the world in which you want to operate, understanding the context in which you've come from. Is that a fair observation? Yeah,
that's a great observation. You can then, once you lay everything out on the table, and for me, psychology went for about 12 months. Once you lay out everything on the table and understand what is at play, you can choose what you pick up again. You can choose what facets of yourself you see as strengths. You can understand your weaknesses and learn how to mitigate that. And so, it's hugely important.
So where to from here for you? And I'll go back to a comment you made in an interview in 2015. You said the biggest challenge has been learning that everything comes at a price. On paper, having the opportunity to work for my favourite radio stations in Sydney at 21 is literally the dream. That was when you said you were 21. So they were actually quite prescient words, and that was an interview with a blogger called Cassie Kirstingham. So 6 years on, what's your take on those reflections now?
Well, what I learned is that success comes in many forms. And so initially in my life, reflecting back, and this is different for everyone, success for me through school was getting a job at the local radio station.
Right.
And then success became producing Today FM Breakfast. That was my goal.
Yep.
And then success was doing that at the top level. I'm very competitive. So I was like, I want to be, if I'm going to do this, I want to do that at the best level. And so winning the achievement for that ticks that box. And then it was doing National Drive and doing a good job at that, and you tick that box, and being the best at that, you tick that box. And then you want a salary increase. And so for me, I was like, I want X salary, and I tick that box. What happens though is you tick those boxes and you realize that that wasn't the fulfillment you were looking for. It's important to have goals, and I certainly enjoyed the time. It doesn't take away from that. But there's more important things in life. And I think it was really rewarding now being around people who had millions of dollars of money, or who had fame, or who had a lot of success, and realizing, on the same thing they had also gone through that process of, and this isn't anyone in particular, but just generally speaking, those types of people had gone through that journey and realized that wasn't fulfilling for them as well. And so I traded real equity. I took a huge pay cut to go and do something that would provide different meaning. And what I have found is real meaning. And that is helping facilitate the stories and the podcasts of anyone who comes and works with us, applying those skills so they sound the best they can, and helping them on their journey. So in terms of like what's next, it's realizing that you can trade different parts of your equity that you have, and it's not all to do with financial. So trading the financial has now given me time back with my family, which is really important. And trading the status that comes with producing a radio show for a lesser known status when it comes to podcast, but a greater output from a soul level of what I'm doing in the world. So when it comes to what's next, we're building a team at Pro Podcast. We've hired a full-time audio producer. I myself am on the team. We're engaging with executive producers and video people, anyone we need to help make sure that we're servicing the podcast space in the best way possible. And we're really proud to get Podcast Audio Producer of the Year in that. But now, Jeremy, just summing that up, what's lovely is having the learning that the status and the awards isn't what's important. It allows you to properly enjoy them. And so in that case, you go, cool, that's an awesome award to win. And then you get to move on with the rest of your life, which isn't centered around that.
Is it an award like you've won? I think it was Radio Today early in the year as podcast producer of the year, I think, from memory. Is that a signpost other than the business going well that you're on the right track?
Before, it would have been more of a signpost for me in the same way ratings would be.
Right.
Someone externally validating. Now it's just it's a joyful thing, and it's not everyone. We're human beings, so we're not. Yeah, I'm not the Dalai Lama. Everyone wants validation, so that's really nice, and we celebrate that. But it's not what I should be focusing my attention on. And what I should be focusing my attention on is building a really great team, being a good leader, showing up every day, and just doing the best work of what I can do in front of me. And what I love about that is I really think that's the goal. And what do I know? I mean, I'm still a 27-year-old, but certainly we all have the ability to do that. We all have the ability to show up at whatever we do and do it presently and to the best of our ability. And that is what will make the world worth living in if we all just show up and do that.
Thinking back on what you've talked about today, and again, thank you. You've given us huge insights into many, many things. It's almost twee asking this because you're not yet 30, but what would 21-year-old Darcy say to the Darcy of today?
I would say,
don't drink bad coffee.
Summarizes. I would say that life will change, that people will change, but that every day is the opportunity to make something new. And I've learned that. I used to get so razzed or stressed about circumstances or people changing and the pace at which life seems to change at times. But realizing actually that's okay. If we can get comfortable with change, we're allowed to enjoy the opportunity, which is to step into a new day and create stuff, wherever and whatever that looks like.
Did you go back to school and thank the principal for giving you that opportunity to go down to CFM and miss sport?
I haven't, but I should. I should send him an email after this and say, hey, I'm really stoked you did that because that was helpful.
Because that seems to me a seminal moment for you. You've walked in, you've cut a deal, the entrepreneur today that you were then, and gone, hey, this is what I reckon. And he must have seen something in you to go, he or she?
He, yeah.
He? Yeah, right, got to be careful, do the right thing. So that would have been a huge, is that your sliding door moment really from when you started? What would have happened had you not been able to do that?
He's awesome. I think he just wanted
off to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like there's things put inside us that have to come out in our life, at some point. So the timeline would have been different.
Yeah.
Radio would have definitely popped up somewhere. I haven't thanked the principal. I think I was just persistent enough to get that across the line. I have many times thanked David Horsball, who was that production manager, and let this kid with no real experience hang around each week, because we all know that workplaces are stressful environments. There's a lot happening, especially in radio. And so I'm very grateful to that man for really propelling me forward into what has been a crazy, wonderful, beautiful journey.
Would you change anything so far?
The only thing I would change is taking things for granted, in that it's easy to reflect now and be grateful for it. But in the moment, you just think, this is, like I said, you're going to be in radio forever, or you just expect the people around you are just going to stay, or like being personal, not to share a down moment, but a powerful moment for me was I lost one of my best mates at the start of the year. And he had called me before he passed, about 20 minutes before he'd passed. And the phone, it had called up and I was busy. I was busy in that moment. And so I knocked back the call. I just hit decline and thought, I'll call him on the weekend, no stress. And then found out that night that he had passed away, which is, it's wild. And I think that is really, truly the source of why I think don't take things for granted. Don't take the people around you for granted. Don't take the life that you have for granted. Don't take for granted, if you're listening to this from Australia, that we live in a country that gives us a really privileged existence and a really fair go at it. Certainly a fairer go than a lot of other places. So, yeah, without being too deep about it, and that shouldn't be a sad moment. That was a really important lesson for me, and not something I feel guilty about, but something I wish I could change. That would be the thing I would change. Don't take little moments that are important to you, like your best mate calling and being unsure of why he's calling. Don't take those moments for granted.
Yeah. I remember many years ago when my uncle, who I looked up to immensely, rang me and he was not well and I didn't ring him back. Mm-hmm. And he died a week later. And I guess that's listening to what that story is about from yours. I was listening going, if I could make... Well, I do many things differently in my life to an extent, but that was one of those I had wish I had rung him back when he rang to talk to me.
Yeah.
And it's about being present, being in the moment. And I've always felt very guilty about that. So it's a really good...
I'm a big believer that there's an opportunity where we get to meet those people again. I really firmly believe that.
Yeah.
But it's hard, right?
Your faith's important to you. I haven't asked you about this, and I'm completely out of line. Your faith's important to you, isn't it?
Faith has been a really driving force in my world for sure. I grew up. I was going to say I just grew up in. My dad pursued being an Anglican pastor. I guess that's where I first learned about faith and church, and he didn't spend long doing that. My family actually left the church and then I got invited back to a church environment when I was 14. I always had a sense of there's a God or there's something that is actually not far away in the clouds, but there's something within me that's I can recognize isn't, some people say voice, or you sense it, you really sense it. And so I have grown up with that feeling. Church early on was a really beautiful expression of that, where you get to learn about that. You get to be around people who are learning about that. It's not, let's play church and rock up on a Sunday and everyone's perfect. The church I went to, it was, hey, we're all pretty human. We're all learning about this. Don't have all the answers and life is messy, but we're going to get together once a week and celebrate this. And then I've just seen time and time again. I mean, Pete passing was one of the most prominent. Pete, my best mate who passed, was one of the real times where I was really involved in facilitating a lot of things after that. And there was this moment where I just had this surreal peace, and you can't explain that. And that's why I am a big believer that we get to see those people again. But I'm also a big believer in what I guess I call that small voice. It's not this faraway God. It's this small voice. God is within us, I believe. You know, the Spirit of God is within us. And if you tune into that frequency, very similar to radio, you can tune what band width you listen to.
So we're talking about the ratings.
You might be a Triple M guy. You might be a pop music guy. But if you tune into that frequency, there's something in all of us. And as you get to know that more and more, it becomes a beautiful part of your world.
What would Darcy of today say to 21-year-old Darcy?
put butter on your Vegemite so you don't get judged for that later. And then he would seriously say, hey, Darcy, it's going to be okay. Don't be so stressed about the future or being perceived as successful or how it's all going to work out, because it will work out better than you anticipated, but very different to what you anticipated.
How fortunate. Do you ever look back on that last day, that day that you did the magical mystery tour and go, geez, I'm glad I wasn't sick that day, or geez, I'm glad I wasn't working at another station that day? Because that seems to me to be an absolutely profoundly important moment of your life, yours and Emily's lives, actually.
Yeah. We were just two kids who found each other, and I'm so grateful for that moment. And I have talked about it too, I think. And this is, now that we've talked about faith, this is where faith comes in for me. I think there's moments in our life where we have control over, and there's moments that have been preordained or pre-planned for us. And there's so many dots to that. And I could go on forever on the backstory of why that shouldn't have happened and how unlikely those circumstances and us coming together were.
Mm.
And that's why it is a profound moment. And I'm so thankful I didn't call in sick. And yeah, it's a moment that really changed my world.
And on that note, Darcy Milne, thank you so much for joining us on Dear 21-Year-Old Me. The next voice you'll hear after me will be Darcy's outro. But, mate, it's been an absolute privilege having a chat today, and I am deeply grateful for your time.
Well, mate, I have enjoyed it immensely. I think the podcast format is unique, and that's why I'm a massive fan of it.
That was an absolute privilege having a conversation with Darcy today, and I am most grateful to him for his vulnerability, his openness, and his humour in what was a really freewheeling conversation. I'm sure whatever he does, he will continue to make it a great success. And again, the story of how Darcy and Emily met is one that I am still chuckling over. I think that is absolutely fantastic. So thank you again, Darcy, and good luck to you, Emily, and Maggie. Thank you to you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Dear 21-Year-Old Me, wherever you are from. It's always much appreciated, as is the support here from Kirst, the kids, and the pooch, who managed to get through a recording today without barking once. I think that's because Kirst put her out the back. So thanks, Kirst, for that. But most of all, for you for taking the time to have a listen to this podcast. I am very, very grateful. Thanks for your time. Stay well. Go well. Bye for now.
Thanks for joining us today. For more episodes and links, visit dear21yearoldme.com. And if you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts.